All right, welcome to the Patriotic Dragon Radio Show, a show to bring open, honest, thoughtful conversation back, allowing individuals and groups to be a part of a brighter, better future. As always, the opinions are those of the guest and not necessarily those of the Pickens County GOP, WYYZ, or our sponsors. This month's sponsor is Aspire to Inspire Before You Expire, a website to give people a place to show who and what has inspired them and what they aspire to accomplish at aspiretoinspirebeforeyouexpire.com. Our guest this week is State Senator Charlie Bethel from the 54th District. Charlie, thank you for being on.
Thank you very much for having me.
Our panelist this week, Bill Cagle. Bill, good to have you on again.
Thanks for having me, Will.
All right. David Leister. Thank you, Mr. Leister.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. Craig Stallings.
Guten Tag.
And Stephen Hall.
As always.
Yeah, I was going to save all the other comments, but I did left, right, but I just decided not to do that. Again, Charlie, thank you for being on and taking the time out. I know that the session is in, and so I appreciate you working your schedule to come up here and spend some time with us and let's talk about the session and then also this very important election year for all of us.
So, Well, I appreciate it, and I do thank you for having me. The session has started. It obviously demands a lot of time in Atlanta, so I'm always appreciative of any invitation that brings me back out of Atlanta during the session, and it'll be a nice night at home to visit my family and those sorts of things. But the session did kick off this week. Of course, Georgia Constitution says we have to start on the second Monday in January every year, and that's what we did. We've had the State of the State address now from Governor Deal. He released his budget proposals, both for the amended budget and the fiscal year 17 budget this morning. In fact, I got my copy at lunchtime today, so haven't had a chance to fully digest it, but I've seen some of the bullet points, and really that kicks off the session. When you have numbers that the governor proposes to work with. Of course, the only thing the Constitution requires us to do is pass a budget when we're in there. A lot of us would like to just do that and go home, but that really gets the process started, and so the hearings then commence, and you go about making the two budgets that we make every year.
Okay. And just I'd like to step back a little bit of stuff and tell us a little bit more about yourself personally. I'll let you go.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that. I live in Dalton, about 2 miles from where I was raised. My wife Lindsay and I both attended public school there. We are both graduates of the University of Georgia. I stayed for a law degree. Lindsay got a pharmacy degree. We lived for a few years in Atlanta and then returned home to start and raise our family there. I practiced law for a few years before returning to a family business for me, the J&J Flooring Group. My grandfather, Tom Jones, co-founded that business with a fellow named Rollins Jolly. That's been rewarding for us, obviously, as a family, but it was good. I got the opportunity to work with my brother and my father and lots of folks that I've known for my whole life. I've been there for about the last decade, and I'm in the midst of professional transition now. We can talk about that later if y'all want to. So after having practiced law, I worked there. Let's see, in the 2003 time frame, some friends approached me about running for city council. I did not realize that was a trap. But I was able to be talked into it and proud to do it. It was really a great experience. I know David has served as a mayor before. You really get to know your neighbors in local government, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the work, and then in 2010, Dr. Don Thomas, who was my predecessor in the state senate, announced that he was no longer going to run. He wasn't going to run. I talked with him about that opportunity. He was encouraging, and again, didn't really exactly realize it was a trap, but came down to Atlanta. And all kidding aside, I've enjoyed the work. There are, like anything else you do in human life, positives and negatives, but I do enjoy the work that we do on a day in, day out basis in the legislature, and it gives me the opportunity, I hope, to give back to a community in an area that's done a lot for me and my family.
Sure. Well, good. Any questions y'all want to ask him personally?
Yeah, I just spent a little time in Dalton. There's a little place called the filling station.
Stephanie,
Great place to eat.
Stephanie will feed you properly. I went to high school with the proprietor, and I have to limit my visits to the filling station because you will eat a lot, and it will all be good.
Well, she only has one problem that I can see, and it's that great big red A on her chest.
I'm going to just say Roll Tide, man. That's all.
Yeah, I know.
There's a lot of those A's running around over the last few years.
The closer you get to that river, man, this is the way it works.
I hear you.
All right, well, good deal. And I always want to ask this question of somebody who's an incumbent, and like I say, with city council, you got to meet all your neighbors. So, what about your political career? What made you decide to run for office that you're in today?
I generally lead with temporary insanity, but that's obviously a joke. I care about the process. I believe in the founding principles of our republic. So I've always been drawn to government and politics, but not really as a career until, like I say, friends approached me and asked me about running for city council. And when I got down to really thinking about whether I was going to do it and talking with my wife, really the question she posed to me was, do you think this is important? And do you think you would be good at it? And so those two questions combined, I said, well, I know it's important. I'm not sure whether I'd be good at it, but I do know the community. I know the area. I understand the law and how those sorts of things work. And she said, well, you know, are you going to look around and look for somebody else to do it? And that really struck a chord with me, as great wives often do. I assume you guys know that experience. I did think it was important. I did think I may be able to do it, and I didn't want to be somebody who always sat around saying somebody else ought to take care of this. And so I thought I will step in and give it a go. I know I've made mistakes and will continue to do so along the way, but I also hope that I'm growing and doing some positive things as I go as well.
Good. We had just full disclosure. Obviously, we had your opponent who's running in the upcoming election on, and then also had after that show we had citizens email. Actually, had some call wanting to desperately be on the show to put forth their ideas or issues and stuff they had in, not necessarily with you, but in the upcoming things. And one of the big things that they had concerns about was the inland port and the Highway 411 expansion. Where do you stand on those two issues, and give us a little bit of background on where you see those?
Sure. The inland port is, I think, inarguably a huge economic boost and benefit to all of Northwest Georgia. And I think even those people that are concerned about it and concerned about its future, for the most part, the majority of that group would agree with that statement. I think that location has been the most commonly raised concern or issue associated with the inland port. And I certainly understand that from two aspects. The first is there are people living in the immediate vicinity who say this is going to change the character of our area. And then the other aspect, of course, is the question of, what will this do in terms of traffic, in terms of pollution, and those sorts of things within the area. So from my standpoint, I'm supportive of good infrastructure development. I actually am not a big fan of sort of corporate, crony capitalism and all those sorts of things where we prop up businesses. But I think at a fundamental level, government does have the responsibility for facilitating the instruments of commerce. So interstate highways, the Savannah Harbor Deepening Project, and inland ports all fit in that category because their nature is such that they are not subject to private investment. It's the same reason why Thomas Jefferson and James Madison worked together to dredge the Potomac River. That from the beginning of the Republic, it was understood that facilitating commerce was clearly a public good. So I think the port is a good thing for the Appalachian regions, they call it Appalachian Regional Port. And I think that we will see benefit from it as a community. The concerns of those in the locality, I think I respect them. I respect them as my neighbors. I do believe that looking at what CSX and Georgia Ports Authority propose in terms of site development, that the concerns will not be as experienced as projected, as people fear. But it's new, it's different, it's in your neighborhood, and I understand that. And of course, as a legislature, I don't have any input in site location for any sort of economic development. My job is to try and make sure that the state is supporting local communities in those efforts. So I don't really have the ability one way or another to influence that issue. 411 is in need of continued improvement. That corridor really, as you get off I-75 at White all the way up to the state line and then into Tennessee, is, I think, an ideal corridor for continued growth and economic development. Helps you cut off Chattanooga and some of the traffic issues associated with that metropolitan area. And so, regardless of the port, that's a need that Georgia has, and we need to continue to focus on it. And even today, I was having discussions with folks at the DOT about scheduling and sequencing some improvements. But having said that, it is important to point out that when you look at GDOT traffic counts in Eton, which is really the most reliable, localized, permanent counting station that the GDOT keeps, the traffic levels, if the port is fully operational relative to last calendar year, the traffic levels would still not be at the traffic levels that were on 411 North in 2009. Now, that's a stark commentary on how bad the recession has been in Northwest Georgia and the manufacturing community. Yeah. And we think that traffic will continue to return and restore and come back as things get better. So it's not to say it's, apples to apples and going to be even, but the traffic count numbers show that we are more than 50,000 trips below our high water mark. So 411 can handle that number of trips.
Right.
But they're going to be heavier. They're going to be trucks. And so we need to make sure that we're taking the appropriate steps to reinforce that. All indications that I've received from trucking people that we've reached out to and the Department of Transportation people is that the increased traffic is going to be on the 411 corridor, the Highway 136 corridor, Highway 52. It's not going to be on these ancillary surface roads, in part because the change in terrain and the topography will not be beneficial to trucks. They'll lose money by having to go up and down hills and around curves and not be as efficient in the operation. So those are the areas we're going to have to make sure our resources are deployed to. And I think everybody involved is committed to doing that.
Okay. All right.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a kind of a short answer of what products will be brought through the inland port going somewhere with this? If you're basically just moving sea lands off of a train onto a truck and then shipping that out of there, pollution shouldn't be a real issue except for maybe high particulate pollution from the trucks. If you're actually transferring product via pumps or blowers or whatever, then that's brings up a whole nother set of circumstances where containment's really important. So
I think that the initial expectation would be that their market that they're pursuing today is for the rigid containers. So the container, not the other things you're discussing, but that will also depend on future growth in the area and what people are wanting to bring in and out of that access point. They project that the service area they want to reach extends all the way up into Kentucky. So to try and drag folks down that way rather than over into Virginia and the Carolinas to reach port. So as economic development happens in that area, those are who are going to access that facility.
Okay. All right.
Good deal. Where is it going to be located?
It is located right off 411, just north of Eton, in Crandall, as you go north into North Murray County.
Yeah, if you're going.
Oh, it's in Murray County.
Yes.
Oh, north of Chatsworth.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. To me, that's the best. That makes the most sense.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Thank you. I was just curious.
My pleasure.
Okay. Steven, you have a question or no? Bill?
That makes sense. We're just talking about the traffic count is still less, what 50,000 less per day?
Well, they project 50,000 containers at the facility when it's fully operational, and we are still not. we're still below that number in terms relative to our peak traffic in the area.
Because I guess Whitfield County still has one of the higher unemployment rates in the Northwest Georgia area.
It does, and of course, what I think we all know is that unemployment, as tracked by the federal government, has become really somewhat of a joke.
Yeah,
because we're not really
most
measuring,
everything in Washington D.C. has become a joke.
We're not really measuring unemployment. What we're measuring is the number of people unemployed actively seeking work, and that's really a whole nother measure than just truly what is unemployment. Unemployment continues to be a problem throughout Northwest Georgia, but yes, the Dalton metropolitan area, which incorporates both Whitfield and Murray counties, is suffering mightily. And even the question came up earlier about the return of flooring and its return. Well, even with that, technological advances and efficiencies mean you can make as much product with less human input than ever before. So we have to make more to even sustain the same levels of employment. So it's a continuing concern for us.
Yeah, and I work fairly. I mean, I was actually on the phone on the way up here this afternoon stuff on a project we're doing with the Volkswagen facility, and you know, when we started talking about it up there at the Volkswagen facility, we've got the R&D division. We moved them out to a separate building for the next 3 years till Plant 2 is completed. Then we're building a new engineering center. And that was when we started talking about the 411 corridor. All of their groups are looking forward to it because Chattanooga 2475 interchange kills them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so that's, Hamilton County they're pulling for it. I didn't realize we were going to be reached as far as Kentucky, but that brings another aspect to it that way. So that's good.
The other thing is that with the new Vocker facility in Tennessee, that's a huge draw. And that's one of the reasons I was asking if it's going to be dry product, if it's going to be cars, because some of the things at Vocker, their byproducts are less than desirable, you know. So naturally they put them up next to the Bowaters.
Really?
Well, and again, most of that, in the nature of an intermodal facility, most of that is happening at the manufacturer site. It's being containerized there. All that's happening when it gets to the railroad track is taking that container and putting it onto the train, and vice versa. If it's coming from the port, they're just going to. So this is really a yard of containers, and the train will come by,
providing nothing leaks.
Well, that's correct.
So that's where I was going with it. Is it, you know, if people perceive that there's some sort of an issue with pollution there, then they're going to be more up in arms. But you know, if all they see is sea lands coming in and out, no big deal.
Yeah. Well, and what Volkswagen's plan is obviously is they're currently doing transport not via train. They have raw materials coming in via train, but they put everything on trucks and send them out 12 at a time. So their plan is to work with, they've already started working with a company to take 8 of them on a unit that will be turned around and crane lifted directly on the train and go to Savannah, to our port, and then go on to South America because they service the Mexican and South American market out of that plant. And that's their big target. So that's good. So, okay. We'll move from that in that part of the region stuff more to some of the bills that are slated and being talked about and stuff as for the session. I know this week, like you say, has been a lot of somewhat, I'll use my term pomp and circumstance, but it's all good to get the 40 days going. How about the bills that are coming up in session? And I just want to kind of touch on them individually and then we'll go around the table, but RFRA just came out on the AJC poll showing about 53% of the people supporting it, but the Chamber of Commerce and corporations pushing back on it.
Well, I'm a co-sponsor actually of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and the AJC did everything they could to word their questions on their poll to get a negative response, and still 53% of those they polled supported it. And really, the truth is that the Chamber of Commerce and some of the corporate interests are really just wrong on the law. They're wrong on what RFRA does. And frankly, the business community should support their employees having the same degree of protection of their free exercise of religion as we enjoy relative to the federal government. Those of you who haven't followed the debate, the issue arose when the Supreme Court in the early 90s decided to change the rule that they applied whenever a citizen went to court saying that their free exercise, their First Amendment free exercise rights had been infringed. And they changed that from what's called strict scrutiny, and this is really lawyer speak, but strict scrutiny is the highest test available under the law. And they lowered it to a rational basis test, saying really all the government needs to do is explain why they want to burden your free exercise of religion, and as long as they can explain it in a reasonable way, we're going to let them do it. Well, there was hue and cry across the country. Ted Kennedy and Chuck Schumer, all these people, they sponsored the federal RFRA, which said, please put back strict scrutiny. Bill Clinton signed it. It was nearly unanimous in the United States Congress to pass RFRA. A few years later, the Supreme Court, in considering that bill, said, this works, but this doesn't work as applied to state governments because the Congress can only bind the federal government. And so it doesn't apply to state governments. And so you've seen this progression of states. Now I think we're over 30 states across the country that have gone through the process of implementing a Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And all the bill does, despite what you've read, despite what you've heard, all the bill does is say when these cases come to court, it's the strict scrutiny standard that applies. That's really all. I mean, the bill is not this terrible long thing to read. It just says we're going to apply strict scrutiny. And strict scrutiny is a specific judicial test. And so, for whatever reason, Georgia hasn't done that in the intervening years, but there's a move to do so now. And the rhetoric around the bill is unfortunately driving people to say the perception is bad. And I don't really want to live in a republic where perception drives laws. Facts should drive laws. Reality should drive laws. And unfortunately, this is one of those that's become whipped into a frenzy. And all of the things that those opponents say the bill does have never, I don't use never and always a lot. My wife has taught me that. I don't use never and always a lot, but has never one time been used to support anyone's discriminatory action against any individual on the basis of sexual orientation or any of those things that you're hearing said. The federal RFRA nor any state RFRA has ever been used successfully in that way. But we are being told and bombarded that that is the purpose of the bill being passed. It just boggles the mind. But I think it'll continue to be an issue. It'll continue to be out there for us to discuss during this session. In addition to that issue, there are going to be other bills, some of which do actually deal with, gender identity and sexual orientation and those sorts of things. And those will obviously come with their own debates. But they will be lumped in with RFRA and RFRA with them. And it's really an unfortunate state of affairs that real debate is not what's driving the RFRA discussion.
Well, David kind of threw you under the bus on that one, though, last year, along with Delta Airlines.
Well, I'm not going to get in. I'm not going to get in between my colleagues in the House. I think the bigger issue is that the discussion should focus on facts and the reality of what legislation would or wouldn't do, and not what people allege it would do with no support.
Okay. All right. Then, and we've heard, you're thinking something, Stephen? If you're thinking
he was thinking it. I'm sitting here looking at him, and it's like Steve's coming out his ears.
That's why we have 2 ears and one mouth. We got to listen twice as much as we talk, and I'm right there with him. I think that RFRA is a fantastic piece of legislation. It doesn't need to be moved forward, but there's not much else to say right now. I mean,
your biggest problem is that the news media will distort it, and they're
No,
going to continue to.
come on
You skeptic,
now.
you cynic.
I'm sorry.
The AJC, the guy
Lord, I
told me,
apologize.
the editor said he was going to be much more fair and balanced. I think he stole that from somebody else, though, but I'm not sure. But, just
Please
saying.
be with the
Just
serving
saying.
pygmies in New Guinea. Amen.
The other thing that was talked about before, and then of course the governor actually, and I'm happy to to hear him say. And just before I go any further, I know that some of our Board of Education members listen to the show. So when you do, listen to what the governor said about don't grab part of the 3% pay raise for teachers like we've done in the past. The education reform, obviously the merit pay is part of it, but also vouchers.
Yes.
Where do you see that in this session? Are we going to get some teeth into it to help these schools that really need students and parents to have a better option?
I think you will continue to see legislation move forward around school choice. My personal prediction is the session will be relatively quiet in terms of what actually goes through the chambers and to the governor's desk, frankly for the political reason that the Opportunity School District is hanging out there, and probably everybody wants to see what the voters do with that in November before starting to bite new pieces of the apple, so to speak. I think that for many of us, we live in communities where we have strong public education systems. My grandfather was 26 years on the local school board, and growing up, the only thing I ever was interested in politics was doing what he did. I thought I might be on the school board one day because I wanted to be like him. But there are places in Georgia where children are attending schools that, when I say chronically failing, yes, this 5-year definition that we use in the federal government and the state government are following, but there are children attending schools that also failed their parents. And none of us can defend the status quo in that world. Now, all of the vouchers and charters may not be the silver bullet or the answer, but staying the course can't be the answer, because whatever we're doing isn't working in those communities. And we live in a state with 10 million people, and those children are going to be part of our future just as much as those that live in our neighborhoods and go to our churches. So we have to be open to the idea that there are tools that might need to be available and be used, even though they may not be in my town or in my county or my part of the state. And that's what I really think you're seeing as far as the move towards school choice. And it does apply in many of our communities to some people, a small subset. But if it applies to you, it's 100% of your family. If it's your child and it's your family that's having issues, you care about it just as much as anybody anywhere else.
Bill?
You mentioned, defining success and failure. Got a lot of friends that are educators in this county and other counties, and it seemed like to me maybe they have dumbed down or redefined the word success, because you've got a lot of really good veteran teachers throughout the state that are fed up with, I don't know if it's so much state mandates, but federal mandates and what have you coming through, because they're not allowed to teach anymore. They're teaching a test. They're not allowed to teach reading the 3 R's. They're not teaching truly civics, the history of our country, how our political system is supposed to work. And they're fed up. And they're just counting down the days of, I've got 6 years, 4 months, 3 weeks, and a day and a half left. I mean, that's bad when you're counting down the days, and it's not just 1 or 2 teachers doing it. You've got a great number of them doing that.
So counting down the last month isn't so bad, but counting down the last decade is really a problem.
That's sad.
It is. There's no question about it. My mother was a public school teacher. My mother-in-law is a retired public school teacher. One of my sisters-in-law teaches down in the metro Atlanta area now in the Cobb County school system. So I get it up close, but also, like you, friends and folks I go to church with and that have those experiences. And there is no question that the profession and the art of education has been battered and bruised and beaten, and the folks in the classroom have taken the brunt of that. It hasn't been the hierarchy and the bureaucracy. It's been the people on the front lines delivering. And so I was very glad to hear the governor say that he was supportive of efforts to move away from the frequency of testing. Some of that is, as you pointed out, the federal government, and with the reauthorization of the Education Act, which could have just been a repealer as far as I'm concerned, but with the reauthorization of that act, a lot of those requirements were removed that were put in during the Bush administration, the No Child Left Behind requirements. So a lot of those were removed. There is an ongoing process to actually go back through Georgia law and look at everything that passed under the education title in the years following No Child Left Behind and say which one of these things were to become compliant with federal law, in hopes that we might be able to peel back even more than they have peeled back in freeing up teachers to teach. I think it is fair to say also that there are a lot of social factors driving the changes happening in our schools too. It's not just purely what's happening at the governmental level. It's a combination, and it's sort of that perfect storm that makes it hard for folks to teach. And at the end of the day, we hear a lot, and one of the things that's been kicked around a lot is merit pay, and I think those of us who live in a free market economy and in a free society, we're drawn to the notion of merit pay. We think you work hard, you do a good job, you should earn some reward and recognition. And I don't think that the teachers or education community is really opposed to the concept. I think what I hear more than anything is, you haven't found a good way to measure me in a fair assessment of what I do, given what I'm seeing, and it's certainly not a test result that defines whether I was a good teacher.
That's part of it. And from what, again, just in conversation with my acquaintances, yes, everybody wants to earn more money, but even money and the furlough days and all that, that's on down their list of frustrations. It's the fact that, a good example, my daughter, who's a senior at North Georgia, she was going into education. I'm very biased, I'll be the first to admit it, but she's an extremely talented musician. She was going to be a music educator. She came home Thanksgiving, Dad, because she's been involved in observation and student teaching and what have you in various surrounding counties and what have you. I think I'm going to law school instead. I can't handle she said, I got too much of me and you, I'll wind up telling.
I'm sorry, Bill.
Yeah, well, yeah. And
there are worse things.
Yeah. So, she said, I just can't handle the bureaucracy and being politically correct. You can't, and I'm not going to mention the county, but there's this one disruptive little boy who happens to be black. The teacher or the administrators said, well, you can't really discipline them because we don't want a discrimination suit thrown against us. It's like, really? Just because he's the color of his skin? Really?
Doesn't he still deserve a good education?
Absolutely. So what about the other kids, the other 15 or 20 kids that can't learn because he's so disruptive?
That's the kids who should file the lawsuit.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
I know a good ACLU attorney.
Wait a minute. That's an oxymoron.
No, he's a good one. He's Jewish. I know him. He's a good guy.
Yeah, but you said good and ACLU in the same sentence. I'm sorry. That's just.
He's in Miami. He's not.
Oh, okay. Well, but I mean, it's sad when you got talented young people that had their hearts set on going into education, and now are like they got a little taste of it. It's like, I can't do it.
Yeah, and then
I agree. I think one of the challenges in education, and my observation as an outsider, not having worked, is that the education community, in my opinion, has a tendency to manage out of a position of fear.
Yeah.
That may be well earned because of the litigiousness of our society and because of all these other sorts of things. But it is unfortunate because teachers then don't get that immediate level of support and reinforcement for doing what's right. With a student, with a parent. Instead, we're trying to soften or avoid a negative repercussion, and that is unfortunate. That's an unfortunate state of affairs when we encounter it. But I think the other part that we all ought to be committed to, one of the things you hear teachers say is that there's a sense of loss of respect for the profession. There's a sense that they're not valued in society. We need to actively combat that. I know that outside of my immediate family, it is teachers who have made the biggest impact on who I am today.
Sure.
Be they, school teachers, be they Sunday school teachers, be they college professors, and so on. The people who are in the process of shaping and molding your understanding of the world are going to shape who you are. And so we need to be cheering them on. They need to be cheering themselves on. One of the things that I always encourage teachers to do is share your success stories, share your positive stories, so that people can appreciate what you're doing and rally behind that. I think people would be, maybe some folks would be surprised at how supportive the community is to learn of those stories. A lot of times we don't know the barriers now, with all sorts of legal barriers about what can be shared and what can be told. You can't tell anyone's name and all these sorts of things. You go to a school and it's sort of like you're trying to get into the Pentagon. But we need to keep telling positive stories, because that's how you restore that relationship and that connectedness between teachers and the community.
Well, I think this kind of leads into what's happened to the teachers, is that they're afraid because of political correctness. And I think that has got to come down from the top in the state of Georgia, that, look, don't worry about being politically correct. We have your back. Speak the truth. So where do you come down on that, speaking the truth as far as in the school?
And before you answer that, I partially disagree with them, because it doesn't come down from the top. It comes up from us.
Okay.
We've become complacent, and we get what we settle for. So we elect you to represent our values and to make sure that that's presented. And I apologize for interrupting. I was going to stay quiet this whole time.
No, it wasn't.
Anyway,
I didn't invite you to be quiet.
I'm just going to be a terrible politician and say I agree with both of you. So
you feel strongly both ways. Yes, I understand.
Some of my friends are for it and some are against it, and I'm with my friends. Well, I think the answer is true in both. That it comes from the top, because leadership matters.
Yep.
But it also comes from the people, and leadership often reflects what the people believe. I do think that too often in our society, we have gotten to the point where we point to someone somewhere and say, if they would do something easy, the thing that is hard in my life would go away. That's not reality. The truth is, I have to probably do something. Now, they may have a part in it, and they may have a role in it, but personal accountability is still at the core of individual success, no matter what you're doing or where you're going. So we have to own that. To answer the original question, I am in agreement that we have to speak the truth, we have to support people, and we have to develop, or maybe not even develop, we have to restore the toughness of being an American. The rigor of debating and being called names and being challenged was something that at one time in our national history we celebrated.
Absolutely.
We wore it on our
sticks and stones.
and it was that's right, and
We
it was
still do
okay.
here.
Yeah.
And that was okay, because we thought, people talk about the First Amendment. We thought that a rigorous and vigorous and aggressive debate yielded good results.
Now it's called microaggression.
That's right. Now, if you say something that hurts my feelings, you need to stop talking instead of me evaluating my feelings.
Right.
And that's what we used to do. Certainly, we ought to do that in a respectful way. There's no excuse, I think, in civilized society for being mean for the sake of being mean. But being truthful is not being mean.
There's like 100 Trump supporters right now in Pickens cheering on for this rigorous.
Me too.
I really don't care about your feelings in an honest debate.
Especially now when it comes to my children.
Absolutely.
No kidding.
Yeah.
When we want to talk about the great season the Falcons had, that's one thing. But when we're talking about our children and our future, we have to be honest with what works, what doesn't. And as Herman Cain famously says, fix the right problem.
Yeah, work on the right problem
Work on
and
the right
fix
problem.
that problem.
Yeah.
So, Senator, the governor came out and said that he wanted a 3% raise for teachers across the board. In short, do you agree?
I do agree. I think that the way he is presenting it is also the right way to handle it from a budgetary standpoint. Will referenced the notion that there was a call for school boards to deliver this as a raise, as opposed to building it into the state formula for salary, which creates constriction in the future. It binds the future legislatures, because now there's a commitment and there's a new number that is the base. Instead, it makes sense to pass the dollars along with a direction, with the express intent that they see a raise. There has not been a substantive adjustment for teachers in many years. And to the point we're saying here, I don't really think most teachers entered the profession to get rich. They would be fools if they did, because you've seen what they've been paid. But it is a measure of value. In a capitalist society, in a capitalist economy, it is a measure of value, and it is appropriate for us to come and say, it is time for you to receive an increase in benefit that's not just associated with retirement, or not associated with your intangible benefits, your health insurance, and those sorts of things. A real, actual improvement in your pay. That's actually true for state employees too. The governor's proposal actually extends to the full spectrum of state employees, and he intends to do so, I think, in the way he's done over the last several years, which allows for some merit evaluation in that process as those funds are distributed in terms of payroll. So I think that's appropriate. I am glad to be able to tell my neighbors who are educators and who work for the state, and the guys who get up on Fort Mountain and Grassy Mountain with the Forestry Service in cold weather and bad conditions, and work for us on our behalf, that it is time for them now to get a new raise.
By the way, I think they say the same thing about entering politics at the state level here in Georgia too, about the pay. So
80 hours a week, 80 hours a week, no matter where you're at.
Nobody joins the General Assembly, hopefully. If they join the General Assembly for the money, they're doing something crooked on the side. The actual pay is not what you join for.
Would you care to name some names, please? Because I'm sure you can.
It'll be in my post-retirement book.
Oh, good. All right, good.
Well, in that same vein of education and funding, something that's near and dear to my heart, and I've talked about it on several shows, is our technical school education, our technical schools, and more importantly, I think, at this juncture in time, is our career academies. Yeah. Where do you stand on that? I know and I'm saying this so, Lieutenant Governor Cagle, if you hear this show, I know that you toted the water, and I'm quite glad he did, till the governor decided to take the bucket on down the hall. So, but...
Well, I am supportive of the efforts of the Office of the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor when it comes to technical education. It is one of the great gaps in our current economy, but an even growing gap as we project into the future of what our needs will be from a workforce standpoint. It also fills in a place that, for some reason, we drifted for a few generations into the notion that after high school, your choice was work or academia in the traditional traditional college environment. And so this huge swath of skilled labor was being unserved and undeveloped in our society. And I think nationwide you've seen a return to that. Certainly in Georgia you have. I think that when you combine that with things like Move On When Ready, dual enrollment, I know within our area, within our community, actually Murray County has one of the highest dual enrollment populations in the state, as far as I know, but certainly in our region, and they're seeing so much success. It makes all the difference for the child. It's a huge savings for the taxpayer, because I'm not double paying, and it makes a big difference for the parent. So we are still seeing a sort of a stubborn knot with our dropout rate in Georgia, but we are improving our graduation rate. That translates into our technical college system. Actually, in the governor's budget, that he has proposed some funding for a new building at the Dalton campus of Georgia Northwestern, and so we welcome that. We have high demand throughout the 54th district for it, and if we're going to be a society that continues to make things, manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, which I hope we all agree is a critical component to any successful economy, we have to have that level of skilled labor. The governor is also proposing that industrial maintenance be included in the high demand career initiative.
Amen, brother.
And I certainly support that, because we have to have that sort of skilled labor to be able to continue to compete on the global stage from a manufacturing standpoint.
Yeah. So again, to those Board of Education members who do listen, and I talked to at Kroger's, that new middle school that we're looking to build, there are CTAE guidelines to put in technical degree type formats for those young people. And if we're going to build a new school, let's build it for the future and let's include those programs. And I still like the idea of an aviation maintenance program with, in a county that has a technical school and heck has an airport that we own. I mean, it's just a concept, but we like to see it go. Yeah. So, all right, good deal. Now for some more challenging issues.
He's about to ask you if you still beat your wife. So
No.
There's no good answer to that. So go ahead.
That's like, do I look bad misdressed? I'm not going to go there. All right, and just not to call any representative out, but Representative Watts. I'm sure Ms. Keisha Watts is an interesting person to go have a glass of wine with, but she's pushing to require gun training in order to get a permit.
Right up your alley.
Where do you stand on that type of legislation, or that legislation in particular?
So
Teed it up
I
for this
vigorously
Keep in mind, a lot of us here are probably packing. So
Yeah. So I vigorously oppose the legislation, and at the same time, completely agree that people who are gun owners should be trained and should be knowledgeable. But that is not the role of the government to include a new mandate or some sort of step for training.
Can I get an amen?
Amen.
All right, very good.
Being a very pro Second Amendment supporter and an NRA instructor, I know this may sound kind of surprising. You're not going to give a kid, just because he's 16 years old, keys to a car and say, "Here, go drive," when they've never learned to drive. The biggest concern that a lot of people I've talked to has is that, the way the left works, they start out with these lofty goals, and which they know they'll never get. And then, again, like smoking. I don't smoke. I don't care for smoking, but you know what? If you want to smoke, tobacco is a legal substance, so who am I to tell you shouldn't smoke? Does anybody got a light for Craig for a cigar?
We got a sprinkler.
So they start out incrementally. They have smoking sections in restaurants. Had that for 5, 8, 10 years, whatever. In airplanes, smoking section on airplanes for a number of years. And then they choke it down to you can't smoke on domestic flights. Now you can't smoke on any flight. You can't smoke at all in restaurants. You can't smoke at all in public places. So that's the fear, is that if we come out with a common sense gun law that, hey, go out and get basic training from the NRA or the local sheriff or whatever, most reasonable people will say, well, that's probably a pretty good idea. But what these commie pinko leftist booger eating bedwetters will do is I
really do wish you'd say what you mean.
No, because we don't have that much time left.
And we play on public radio.
Is next thing you know, we're going to be like Australia, England, or Great Britain, whatever, most of Europe. So that's the biggest fear.
Well, so
they don't trust government.
Yeah, it's called creeping incrementalism.
Yes.
So if you're a fish and the worm looks good, watch out for the hook.
Yes.
I will only disagree with one aspect of what you said, and that is that the left starts with something they don't think they can get. What they do is they ask for what they want, back up, and then slowly get there. And it's the same thing you saw with Obamacare. What they really want is single-payer health care.
Yes.
Couldn't get it, so they've passed a system that will necessarily break and result in single-payer health care.
Yeah, they create a catastrophe that they have to come in and supposedly fix.
But I couldn't agree with you more on how that strategy plays out and how it works out. And again, I'll say that there is no excuse for a parent or an adult or any responsible person in our society raising someone and providing them with a firearm and not being part of training that person and making sure that they understand the safe and proper way to use it. That's where that should happen, not at the government level. And so I agree with you. There will be some firearms legislation this year. I think I've worked with Rick Jaspers, the representative who lives here in Jasper.
Who's that?
I've worked with him on some firearms legislation in the past, and I know he's working on some legislation now. There's some that's starting up in the Senate. Nothing on the scope of what we saw a few years ago, but that will continue to be an issue. I myself am not an instructor, but am a life member of the NRA, and I just think that the difference, hopefully, and we have to continue to assert this, the difference between smoking and firearms is that there's not an amendment that deals with your right to use tobacco.
Right.
But there is, and they knew.
But the left doesn't care about that.
Well, but we do.
Right.
And we have to continue to articulate that. Interestingly, it's funny that, like I said, I'm a life member of the NRA, and so when I first ran for the Senate, they send you all these questionnaires for you to fill out, and I got one with quotations. You can't see this on the radio. Wrong, according to the NRA, and so they graded me. My original grade with the NRA was a C, because they don't give anything. If you don't answer 100% right on the questionnaire, you can't get a B if you've never held elected office that has gun policy. So your next stop down, you miss one, you go to C. That's the toughest school I've ever been to. But the question was whether or not in property owned by a private employer, you should have the right to carry. And my answer was there's a competing interest, and that is the interest of private property. And for time immemorial, I have been able to say on my property, and I told the guys at the NRA, I said, the policy you want is the policy where I work, my family business. We have the exact policy. But I don't think the government can make us do that, because we own the land. Right. And so I go, and so then all of a sudden, my colleagues, when I came in, they were, oh, you got this C and all this kind of stuff. I said, that's okay. You'll see where I stand on the Second Amendment as we go forward. But that's really my only point of digression with any of the major firearms groups.
Well, as far as the NRA and the politics goes, I'm not a big supporter of a lot. I mean, any group that would say Harry Reid they support, because he has probably lied most of his career on firearms. But anyhow,
follow the money.
Yeah, so sometimes the NRA gets a little bit on the politics. Common sense goes out the window, like a lot of.
Well, anything that becomes a large industry has a tendency to stray. I mean, that's not a comment on anyone. I mean, that's NRA. That's anybody, because the institution begins to have its own interests as an entity, and you can sometimes lose focus on your core mission.
Sounds like government.
It is. There's no doubt. There's no doubt about it. It's actually it's one of the reasons to be a conservative, is that very reason. But it's also one of the reasons why those of us on the conservative side who are pro-business should also recognize that some of the same threats, not all the same, because businesses don't have guns and tax agents and those sorts of things, but some of the same threats exist in big business. I mean, it sort of gave rise to some of the populism of the Teddy Roosevelts within the Republican conservative movement, which was the idea that when you consolidate and aggregate power in any form, it is a threat to the benefit of the public.
We'll just say one thing: Apple and Microsoft. Okay. Anything you want to add? You have? No, I don't.
No, we don't have that.
I'm gonna add a lot. All right. All right, now.
Actually, I could. But.
For another challenging issue, I'm going to kind of jump down one stuff and all that. In House Bill 171 on Sharia law.
So
there we go.
Let me say it this way. I think today it is incompatible with our form of government to have any law that is based in religion, not on religion, because we talk about our form of government coming from the Ten Commandments and coming from that Western Judeo-Christian tradition, and it certainly does. I think that's inarguable. And our values that translate into our law are certainly informed by our religious beliefs and our faith. but you cannot have a system of law that is in the religion. It is contrary to Western legal dogma. So, whether it's passed or not, I think is really sort of, it doesn't really matter. And the reason is, unless you're going to go into the Constitution, no legislature can bind a future legislature. So you could pass a bill into the Georgia Code that says we don't have Sharia law in Georgia. Well, that's fine until you have a law that enacts Sharia law, and it will repeal all laws in conflict with law. So if you wanted to say that in the Constitution, I personally am not persuaded that it's particularly necessary, because the nature of the Constitution is that the laws that are passed are the laws that are passed.
I have a question about it, though.
Yes.
Why are we allowing the tail to wag the dog?
PC.
Right. Because that's all this is about. I mean, basically, if you were looking at the people who would be bound by Sharia law in the state of Georgia, they'd be probably 0.5 to 1%. So why would we enact on all of the people of Georgia something that is effectively only wanted by 1 to maybe 0.5% of people? Why do we do that?
Well, I don't think that we do. I think the short answer is we don't. We don't have a statutory scheme that authorizes that. I believe strongly that the courts of Georgia should, as a matter of public policy, reject any sort of private contract, any sort of private arbitration agreement that is based on what I consider to be the inhumane aspects of Sharia law. Now, if you want to sign a contract with another person, private law has existed in Western society forever. If you want to sign a contract that says, we agree to have this decided under this series of rules and laws, you can do that. But if those series of rules and laws say that you may abuse your spouse, or you may, cut off somebody's hand, or these sorts of things, then Georgia courts, when those agreements come in, should say, we're sorry. We do not recognize that because it's against contrary to public opinion.
Well, let me finish one more thing. Okay, is that okay? If you were to listen to the news media, you would think that the gay and lesbian population in the United States was somewhere in the 30% range. It's more like 3%. Yet we've basically thrown DOMA out the window for 3% of the population in the United States. It makes no sense. It goes back to this PC crap. We have got to speak the truth. Mr. David?
Every elected official takes an oath of office to uphold the Constitution of the United States and Georgia. And no offense to both of your vocations, but as a citizen, I don't need you to interpret English for me. I don't need to know what is. I know it. And the problem we're having is these agendas that are being set by small groups and lobbyists. Mm-hmm. And as we elect you and others, we expect you to uphold our value system, not to appease small groups. And that has gotten away from everything, Mm-hmm. And I'd like to say it's not your fault. It may not be your fault personally, but in general, it is the fault.
It's my fault along with the other 300 million Americans. It is our fault because it's our republic, and if we don't own it and tend it and claim it, no one else will.
Right. And in closing, because we're getting tight on time here, stuff is the one thing that I will say. I always believe in pro and con. That the comment about a certain population being a certain percentage versus a larger anticipated, there's probably legislation that will come across the floor of different state houses this year for a lower percentage of people, and that's young people with autism. We need to listen to those situations.
Autism isn't a choice.
No, it's not a choice, but it has to be funded somewhere. So that's part of the American democracy is we let people vent out. If they look like fools at the end of the conversation, they can do that. But we give them their, that's one of the amendments as well is, they have the right
but autism's a medical condition. I mean, the last I heard, being a Muslim was not.
No, but what I'm saying is it's got to go through the system. We got to let it filter through. Charlie, again, I want to thank you for being on. I really appreciate it.
Well, my pleasure. Let's do it again.
Absolutely. Yep. And just in closing, notes on our upcoming events. We're starting to sell tickets this week for our February 27th sock hops at the Chattahoochee Technical College, with part of our funds going to the Operation Comfort Warriors with the American Legion post. Please look for those in area locations like here at Rocco's Pub and Grill, Buffalo Luke's, Quick
Mary
Burger,
Ann's.
Trout's, and Mary Ann's. And thank everybody else for being on again. Talk to you next week.
Hoorah.
I'd like to propose for the next